Now it's time for one of the most popular segments in show history, In the News with Jim Cornette. And we'll get going with that right now. Jim, are you ready?
In the news, oh Lord, in the news.
You sang that last time we did.
You did not know that was a real song. Are you kidding?
Who sang that song?
It was in the news, that the famous fucking World War II band leader. News.
Oh. It sounded like some Manhattan Transfer bullshit.
Or actually, maybe it was In the Mood. Oh, yeah.
That changes
It's either In the Mood or In the News or one of those things. I don't know.
Hopefully you're in the mood for the news, but I am joined right now. Last time we called him the Keith Olbermann of the Super Podcast, Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim, I believe you have some headlines and stories in front of you presently, and the first one in what is actually going to be a 3-story look at Terrible Ted is from Valdosta, Georgia.
No, it's not. It's Valdosta, Georgia. There's been a misprint. Valdosta, Georgia, in the southern part of the state on October 10th, 1970. This was carried by UPI. A 600-pound black wrestling bear known as Terrible Ted was arrested Thursday night and placed in the security yard at Lowndes County Jail after refusing to meet his opponent, Big Ed Williams. The promoter of a wrestling troupe traveling with Terrible Ted had allegedly advertised that anyone who cared to wrestle and pin the bear would win $1,500. Williams from Lowndes County took the challenge, but Terrible Ted's promoter, Al Livick from Jacksonville, Florida, refused, saying the bear was too dangerous. Williams took legal action, and the bear was impounded by Sheriff J.L. Futch. Futch said it was the first time in his 22 years in office that he has had to arrest a bear. Bond has been posted at $3,000, and Roger E. Douglas, one of Terrible Ted's 2 attorneys, said they are working to have him released and doing what is necessary to protect our client, unquote. He said they hope to have the bear released within a few days. Meanwhile, Terrible Ted awaits his trainer, David McKigney, who comes to the jail once a day to feed him. His case is scheduled for trial during the second week of December. This was October.
Terrible Ted arrested.
Oh, my gosh.
Have you ever heard of one of the wrestling bears being arrested?
You know, here's the thing. Dave McKigney was the bear man from Canada, and he traveled with Terrible Ted. And with this promoter, Al Livick from Jacksonville, Florida, it could have been somebody from the Florida office, or this might have been an independent show. And apparently they put because I don't think they would ever challenge a fan to meet the bear on a Florida office show. So point being, I'm trying to figure out why they didn't do it. And the only thing that I've come up with is that there's some fucking problem where the bear, because I've been told this before, if the bear was a female and was a certain time of the month, they would get very aggressive. And that is a time where you shouldn't have them work. I've also been told that if a woman in the audience was at a particular time of the month, that the bear could tell and would sometimes make lunges for him. It was always interesting when the bear was around.
It sure sounds like it. Well, we get a little bit of an update a few days later, 4 days later, on October 14th. Again, Valdosta, Georgia. What's Terrible Ted up to, Jim?
Well, Big Ed puts Terrible Ted in Bastille, Valdosta, Georgia. Terrible Ted is still sitting in jail, and Ed Williams is apparently going to keep him there until he agrees to wrestle him. Terrible Ted is a 680-pound wrestling black bear, or at least he was until he ran into Williams, known locally as Big Ed. Ted belongs to David McKigney and is a part of a promotion for a group of touring wrestlers. McKigney challenges men to step in the ring with the huge bear and offers $1,500 to the man who agrees to do it. Williams did just that last week, and McKigney promptly withdrew the offer. Williams retaliated by getting an attachment against the bear, and the animal was jailed by Lowndes County authorities. Judge Omer Franklin ordered the animal freed Monday, but Williams sought and received another attachment against him, and Ted is still behind bars. McKigney said Monday his bear is 20 pounds overweight and is suffering in the hot sun in the jail security yard. He said if the dispute is not resolved soon, it may infringe upon Ted's important hibernation time.
And McKigney's money, because this is how he made his money.
And I was starting to smell an angle. But this Big Ed Williams character is getting known locally as Big Ed. He's getting a lot of mention. He sounds if it wasn't an angle, if they never had the match, then it sounds like he was just a local asshole that thought he could whip the fucking bear.
And they said, you can't work with the bear tonight. The bear's a little dangerous. Maybe the period, maybe something else. And he said, well, I'll sue. I want my $1,500 to fight the bear. They should have let the bear loose. They should have let the bear fight him.
Well, wait, there's a third part to this story.
From the next day, yeah.
On October 15th, Terrible Ted freed on bond but faces bare facts of trial, Valdosta. Terrible Ted was freed from the Lowndes County Jail yesterday, but the happiest one around was the jailer. I'm glad to see him go, he sighed. Terrible Ted is a 680-pound wrestling bear. Ted, freed under $3,000 bond, was jailed last week through no fault of his own. His owner, David McKigney, had refused to allow Ted to wrestle a 350-pound construction worker named Big Ed Williams. He may have been trying to take care of the fucking bear, this big fat fuck. Williams had responded to advertisements offering $1,500 to anyone who'd step into the ring with Ted. McKigney told Williams that Ted had developed a bad disposition and might be dangerous. Williams charged in effect that McKigney was welching out on his advertisement and swore out a warrant of attachment. Ted was jailed as security. Ted and McKigney left for Florida later yesterday, but must return in December for trial. I'm sure that fucking happened. A Canadian wrestler and a Canadian bear are going to be back in Valdosta, Georgia real soon, Judge.
Well, the promoter was from Jacksonville, and this is in Valdosta, Georgia. Would this have been an outlaw show in Georgia?
Well, yes, because there, and once again, Barry Rose or somebody in Florida can help me out, but there used to be, I believe, used to be a regular outlaw promotion in some part of the 70s around the Jacksonville area.
Well,
so, but who knows?
Well, we'll see what we can find out about that.
Valdosta is also, 30 miles across the Florida state line, and Jacksonville's up on top, so it's very close.
Well, Jim, for our next story, let's go to San Jose, California, Thursday, November 13th, 1958.
Fans chase bad guy, one stabbed. San Jose, California. When Fritz von Gehring plays a bad guy, he plays a bad guy. Fritz is a wrestler, the kind they love to boo, but last night the fans in San Jose Civic Auditorium did more than that. They chased the villain right into the street. The bad guy had one friend, fellow grunt and groaner Clyde Steves, who was slashed in the arm while protecting his buddy from an irate knife-wielding fan. The troubles of Fritz and Clyde began when Von Gehring and his good guy opponent, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, started chasing the referee down an aisle. Up strode an unidentified fan, a sneer on his face and a knife in his hand. Steves, sitting in the audience, jumped up to block the knife thrust. He got it in the arm. Then about 200 of the 2,000 or so spectators took out after Von Gehring. Nature Boy, taking no chances, decided to sprint too. Steves trotted to a hospital. Unable to catch the villain or even the hero, fans started bashing each other in a wild melee in the parking lot. Police broke it up before any damage was done. They're still looking for a man with a knife and two wrestlers, a good guy and a bad guy.
What an amazing, there's no riot that's better than a wrestling riot. Because it's just chaos. I mean, they're going after him, they're beating up, they're chasing the good guy, the bad guy, then they start beating each other up. You used to see it was emotions. They would get worked up over this shit. I saw the nephew of a woman that had been to the matches in Louisville every week for 10 years at that point, and he'd come with her many times, get so mad at Jimmy Hart one night that he's the one that rolled in the ring and started wailing on Jimmy and got booted in the face and thrown out and arrested, etc. The cops would be on one side, throwing people off the apron of the ring while somebody's trying to take a knife away from somebody else. And it was fun. Not when you were the heel, but at least they never chased me out of the building. They've chased me away from some buildings, but never out of one. That's the one thing I've never seen in my time as a fan, but I've heard stories, Wild Bill Curry, it happened to in Montreal, of fans chasing wrestlers out of the building. Just imagine driving by and you see a wrestler in his trunks running out the front door, followed by the referee, followed by 200 angry fans who then start beating the shit out of each other. Well, Jim, let's stay on the topic of wrestling riots because they're great. And this next article is from Beckley, West Virginia, your old stomping grounds.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah.
November 3rd, 1960.
Black Napoleon slugs fan. Wrestling show ends in brawl. Man hurt. A free-for-all broke up a WOAY TV studio wrestling show Saturday night, which ended with an 85-year-old Eccles man in the Beckley Memorial Hospital. William Thompson, 86, was reported in satisfactory condition today after being tossed around by the Black Napoleon, one of the wrestlers. Thompson's injuries came about when the Black Napoleon came into the audience to get into a free-for-all in which the audience and his opponent, Billy Fox, were embroiled. Thompson, who was sitting in the second row, was trying to get out of the way of the wrestlers, but when he got up, Black Napoleon hit him in the neck with his fist and picked him up, throwing him through the air, according to his wife's account. Boy, those wives really back you up when you get in a brawl with a wrestler in Beckley. Shirley Love, MC of the weekly events, said, "I don't really know what happened. All I know is that the fans were real excited and chairs were sailing through the air. I was on the opposite side of the ring and was covering the match in the ring at the time when things started happening." Mrs. Thompson has stated that she's going to press charges against the wrestler, as she already has talked to Paul Forney, her counselor. Hospital officials were reluctant to disclose information about Thompson, but his wife reported that the doctor said Saturday night that he was in, quote, bad shape. She said, "Sunday, he couldn't swallow, and his neck was swollen from his chin all the way plumb to his collarbone. His back also was injured, as he was landed when he was thrown all the way plumb through the air," unquote. Thompson is a retired coal miner from the Island Creek Coal Company. He and his wife attend the Saturday night events whenever they can. 27 years later, the same thing happens. A retired coal miner with a wife that will back him up. Hell, he's in bad shape. I don't know how he's going to make it. Why, he can't see out of his eye. I'm telling you, they get rowdy up there in Beckley, up there in the hills.
That's the story, and we'll be talking about that on a future super podcast. Years later, of course, you would have your run-ins in Beckley, although no one accused, in your case, the Black Napoleon of picking up an 85-year-old man and throwing him through the air. There's no chance.
But, you know, and WOAY TV, let me just put this in perspective. When I was shooting Smoky Mountain Wrestling from 1992 through 1995. WOAY TV 4, along with another station in Bluefield, West Virginia, 50, 60 miles down the road, were the only two television stations in between Charleston, Huntington, West Virginia, and down in fucking Bristol, Tennessee, and over in Roanoke, practically. So this was 32 years before that. They had a studio wrestling show on Saturday night on this TV station in the middle of goddamn mountains, and everybody watched that show. Shirley Love, the host, it was a guy, by the way, not indicative of that name, ended up being elected to state politics for years. Went to the state capitol as an elected politician of some sort because of his fame in the backwoods and hollers up in those mountains from hosting the Saturday night wrestling show. And Black Napoleon was probably one of the main event guys. They had their local set of stars there that most people, even in the wrestling business outside of West Virginia at some point, had never heard of. But there's also Gene and Jan Madrid. Gypsy Joe was Gene Madrid, and Jan Madrid was his alleged brother. And they were two back when Gypsy Joe was a handsome guy with his hair slicked back. And but it was a small money, small time territory. But when you got a TV show or two up in those hills, you know, like I said, it was one of the only two stations for a fucking 150 or 200 mile stretch each way.
Well, Jim, I always get a kick out of stories where the fans get involved and there's unintended consequences. And that kind of goes into our next story from the Los Angeles Times, Thursday, November 6, 1952.
Pop bottle tosser given $300 fine. Brady Wilson, 50-year-old house painter who threw a pop bottle at a wrestler last June 4th at the Olympic Auditorium, was fined $300 yesterday by Superior Judge Thomas L. Ambrose. Brady pleaded guilty to simple assault as a result of injuring Lester Sample, 15 is the father of Junior Samples. Lester Sample, 5714 Cecilia Avenue, Bell Gardens. We got his address down there in case anybody wants to harass him. When the missile he hurled at wrestler Danny McShane missed the ladder, skipped across the canvas of the squared circle, and struck Sample.
You're sitting there, you're enjoying a wrestling show.
You get hit in the face with a fucking bottle.
Meanwhile, Danny McShane, he's fine.
Well, that's good to know, yes. Well, he had enough scars on his head, I'm sure. But that's the kind of heat that a guy like Danny McShane could get.
Jim, we have a couple more stories this week, and it wouldn't be an episode of In the News without a story about Eddie Graham misbehaving in public. I think we've had one almost every single time we've done this, so today should be no different.
With the date on this, Tampa Bay Times, December 28, 1959. Police charge Tampa wrestler. Tampa wrestler Eddie Graham, 29, last night was charged with disorderly conduct after police said he jumped on the stage and knocked down entertainer Charles Farrell at the Colonial Inn, St. Petersburg Beach. Graham posted a $50 bond and was released. Police quoted Graham as saying he was offended by a remark Farrell made on the stage. The wrestler knocked Farrell to the stage floor before being restrained by friends, police said. I know exactly what happened here.
What happened?
Well, look at this. This is December 1959. Eddie Graham is one of the top heel tag team champions in New York with the Grahams, with Dr. Jerry Graham. He's been main eventing Madison Square Garden. He's now in Florida being featured as a main event guy. He's not out of his 20s yet, but it's a place that he's going to make his pretty much his home, and ended up buying the business, et cetera, et cetera. And he goes to a show at this Colonial Inn, and whoever this Charles Farrell was, the lounge singer, whoever the fuck, probably said something about wrestling. And probably got his fucking ass handed to him. Because I mean, that's happened before. Remember I told you a story about when Bill Dundee one time almost got in a fight with Jerry Lee Lewis and his fucking bodyguards in Hernando, Mississippi, for making something about those phony wrestlers. And Terry Funk just finished telling me a story in when he was a kid. Him and Dory, like 7, 8 years old, whatever they were, at a restaurant in Amarillo with his dad and some of the wrestlers and their families. When somebody said something about wrestling, he said, I just watched my father just beat the shit out of that guy. And I don't think that guy thought that wrestling was a bunch of shit. That's what they did, because shit like this got in the fucking paper, and people said, well, we're not going to fucking talk bad about those fucking wrestlers, or they will beat the fuck out of us. And it helped for quite a while. It was Haku when he bit the nose off the guy's face in Baltimore, because the guy led with, hey, you phony wrestlers, or fucking John Stossel and David Schultz, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, Jim, before we get to our final story here, I do want to make mention that these stories come from the research of Scott Teal, and you can access this research, these clips, and so much more by visiting the Crowbar Press Archives on Facebook, and you can purchase many of Scott's amazing books by going to crowbarpress.com. The finest in wrestling history in book form. So check that out, and we thank Scott for all the hard work he does researching these articles. And Jim, the final story this week is from the Minneapolis Star, Tuesday, November 19th, 1949. An interesting little article here.
It's from a larger sports column in the sports section, but Matt Referee Explains. Wrestling breaks into the column as Wally Carbo, referee, explains. It seems like everybody in town has been asking what happened in the Luthez-Sandor Szabo wrestling match last Tuesday. Here's the way it looked to me as the referee. Szabo slammed Thez with a backdrop, and I could see the boards jump about 6 inches into the air. What I couldn't see was that when they came down again, there was about a 6-inch separation between two boards with nothing but canvas in between. Szabo apparently stepped into the hole and, according to his story, called for time. Then Thez drop-kicked him and pinned him. Some ringsiders confirmed Szabo's story that he called for time, but the timekeeper didn't hear him, and neither did I. As long as no official called time, there was nothing to do but let the result stand with Thez the winner. It's easy to agree now that Szabo got a bad break, and I think this is the first time in the 5,000 wrestling bouts I've refereed that the ring itself has decided the winner. Comment from the editor: how often does a sports official admit his error?
Well, this is pretty good. This is a pretty interesting little article here. Wally Carbo, of course, would later be the promoter in Minneapolis.
And think about this. Think about this. While I worked with Wally Carbo when he was coming out with Tor Berg and the crew from Minneapolis for the LPWA tapings in 1991. This was 1949, and he had already refereed 5,000 wrestling matches and would go on to actually be legitimately not only promoter Wally Carbo, but he was pretty much Vern's money partner for Vern to be able to fully buy what eventually became the AWA. He had been around the business that long. It was just amazing the shit he had seen.
I have a feeling he refereed 5,000 wrestling matches just like Ric Flair slept with 10,000 women.
Well, no, I mean, well, let's see. If he was the only referee on a card with 5 matches, he did that 25 a week, 100 a month, 1,200.
Well, how many cards had 5 matches in 1949?
Well, but okay, then 3. Because I mean, even in the Midwest, sometimes they had the big 5-match cards, but nevertheless, you could referee 5,000 matches in 7, 8, 10 years, whatever the fuck. But in 1949, it's just amazing.
Just amazing. And with that, another edition of In the News is in the books. Jim, any final words from your news desk?
In the news? Oh, boy. Baby.
In the mood or in the news?
In the mood, in the news, whatever. I don't fucking know.
There's the closing bell.
This is the closing bell.
Okay, well, that sure was. We just had a classy segment talking wrestling history. And this is how it has ended.
Oh, yeah, we wouldn't want to fucking trash up the fucking segment about the goddamn arrested wrestling bear.